And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Monday, September 26th. I am your host for today's program, Paul DeMain, and today we're going to go straight to our interview in Anchorage, Alaska with the Alaska Public Radio Network News Director, Lori Townsend. Lori Townsend, we're talking to you in Anchorage, Alaska today. And we'd like to know a little bit about some of the stories that Alaska Public Radio Network is bringing to the public.
Yes. Hi, Paul. I think that it's noteworthy, at least from my perspective, that we had our first hard frost last evening. And so my plants looked pretty droopy and sad this morning.
Time to bring in the garden?
Yeah. Well, luckily I dug the potatoes this weekend, so I'm set. One of the stories that we just reported on was the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission has the former executive director, Maggie Ahmaogak, was just indicted by a federal grand jury on embezzlement charges. This is the second time in 4 months that a former director has been charged with stealing money from AEWC. In June, the director that took over after Ahmaogak was fired from the position was indicted on $100,000 worth of embezzlement charges from AEWC. But Maggie Ahmaogak was the director from 1990 until 2007. And the allegation is that she started stealing money around 2004 and sent cash advances to herself, wired money, $12,000 at one point, put a down payment on a Hummer on the AEWC charge card, paid utility bills, went on trips, gambling trips to Washington State, Las Vegas, New Orleans, for a total of about $474,000, paid herself bonuses and also payroll advances that didn't get paid back. So this investigation has been ongoing for more than 9 months and just resulted in charges.
Between the two individuals, that's $500,000 taken out of the system somewhere. And it seems to me, at least in case of this woman, she was known as a respectable elder or activist in her community, one of the pillars, perhaps?
You know, it's really a sad situation because Maggie's husband, George, was the North Slope Borough mayor for 5 terms. Very respected whaling captain and family. I spent time at their home years ago when I was in Barrow filling in for the reporter at KBRW, and went over and met with them and did sort of a profile of George and his kind of dual role as a local official, also a whaling captain. And they talked a lot about the importance of that tradition and how important the whaling culture was. And so this is kind of a sad situation to have unfold, that these allegations have come out against Maggie. And currently her husband George is again running for mayor. He left the post and went to work for Shell for a while as a state advisor to Shell drilling, and then is now running for mayor again. Mayor Edward Itta has termed out, and so he will be done in October as mayor. And George is running once again, and these allegations now, these charges have come out against Maggie.
Doubt if the allegations are going to help that political situation at all. And it's unfortunate. So.
Yes. George Ahmaogak has come out and said the charges against his wife are baseless. He plans to continue on with his race for mayor, and it'll be an interesting race to watch now to see what happens.
Right. And watch the case. In our country, people are presumed innocent until found guilty, and but sometimes the basis of a charge says something was going, yes. Especially the allegations, the way they're listed out there. You know, it seems to me that some of those things are even inappropriate. If you were to use a credit card for something and then reimburse it later on, it's just not supposed to be used for those kind of personal things. So
shouldn't be done. No.
Yeah. You got a couple other things going on here.
Yes, there's also the Arctic Slope Native Association that's one of the entities that helps. As you know, there are corporations in the state, native corporations in the state, and they have subsidiaries that contract for a lot of other work. Some of those nonprofits, Manilic and others, do medical service work. The Arctic Slope Native Association is one of those entities, and they are currently waiting to see if the U.S. Supreme Court will hear their case against the Indian Health Service for contract support payments. And this isn't a new situation. The Cherokee case in 2005, the courts found in favor of the Cherokee tribe in saying that the IHS must pay its bills when it contracts for service and agrees to a certain amount, then doesn't pay that amount, that they should be held responsible for paying those bills. The Arctic Slope Native Association, it's a similar case. They had an agreement with IHS, had contracts laid out, and didn't receive the money. Part of what is at issue here is when the federal government overextends itself to that degree, if they're then liable for paying damages on the fact that the contractors then have to go out and try to find money from a bank loan to cover expenses. They get charged, and when things fall behind, everybody gets penalized. And one appeals court, the Federal District Appeals Court that handles most contract disputes for the federal government and other contractors, said no, essentially the government doesn't have to pay its bills, and that's okay. The 10th Circuit in Denver found quite the opposite and said, no, federal government, you must pay your bills, and found in favor of ASNA. So now they want the Supreme Court to look at these two diametrically opposed decisions and give them some guidance. What's interesting also about this case is that the defense contractors and the National Organization for Defense Contractors and also the U.S. Chamber of Commerce also supplied briefs for ASNA in support of their claim in this review to the Supreme Court, because they have an interest in making sure the federal government pays its bills also. Right. So far, it's only been tribes that the federal government has shortchanged on contracts. But if this decision stands from the Federal Circuit, then theoretically, this standard could be applied to Boeing or GE or any other federal contractor.
Sure, but you want to remember that there's always that thing called the political question. The U.S. Supreme Court could rule that the United States stole the Black Hills, but unfortunately they won't raise the issue of whether they can get land back versus compensation for funds. The Supreme Court ruled for the state of Georgia, but the Georgia militia says, well, let them enforce their rulings and move the Cherokees out of Georgia at that time. And, the question is could this thing go all the way to the top and just be ignored, especially in an era where all around you, the amount of money is being cut and sliced and doesn't exist anymore. I mean, not only is there not any money to pay back compensation they didn't pay for, there may be not any money from other places to do anything with.
Well, one of the things that I asked the attorney in this case was, could it be that the courts or somehow see this differently because of the fact that we're talking about another government, that because this is a government-to-government relationship between tribes and the federal government, could that be why they're seeing this differently? And he said Scalia asked the same question several years ago, and that was clarified by Congress, that the tribes, the contracting with tribes should certainly be treated in the same manner as other federal contracting. So there doesn't appear to be any reason why these contracts should be treated any differently than any other federal contractor. But yet, in fact, they are and have been.
Right. So they're looking for recovery. The money's already owed plus interest because they've had to go out in order to keep their operation going and borrow money at interest at a rate. And
it also endangers their funding that they are supposed to, that Congress requires tribes to apply for funding for certain parts of their medical business through Medicaid and Medicare. And when they don't have full contract support, that endangers their Medicare money also. So it's kind of a domino effect.
Indeed. It's
it will probably be October sometime before we find out if the Supreme Court will in fact look at this case.
Okay. And as long as we're talking about the lack of money, there's some action on Postal Service. Now, rest around the country, we got notified the other day that they want their suggestion about where they should close postal offices in northern Wisconsin, Minnesota, causing an uproar because they've already thinned them out pretty good. And it looks like they're going to thin them out again, stop Saturday deliver. But what do they want to do with the Alaska brand of Postal Service?
Yes, there's in Alaska, because we have so many communities that are in such remote locations, many of them off the road system, and you can only reach them by air or some by water at certain times of the year. Because of that, we have something called the bypass mail system. And what that means is goods come into the postal service area at a central location here in Anchorage, and then the post office contracts with private carriers in the state, uh, mostly private flight carriers, to carry the mail out.
It
But they
makes
lose money on it.
it makes sense though, but okay, but they're losing money
Right.
on it.
Yes, it's subsidized, and
The
they're losing money
Postal
on it.
Service are the contractors that are flying the mail. Who loses money?
The Postal Service.
Okay.
They're saying about 70 million a year. The representative from California, Daryl Issa, had figures of about 100 million a year that the Postal Service loses on the bypass mail system. So his proposal within this Postal Reform Act of 2011 is a section called 408 that would mandate that the state of Alaska has to reimburse the USPS for the money for bypass mail. Of course, our congressional delegation is quite upset by that because it's very, very expensive to get packages sent to rural Alaska anyway. And without the bypass mail system, it would be impossible for people to get groceries and other, everyday goods sent out to villages. And so they're pushing back, and Senator Murkowski has requested a hearing of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee to meet on this issue. She
Okay.
said that we should not abandon the principle of universal service for universal rates.
Right. Well, which is interesting in Alaska's case, considering the U.S. Postal Service is going to downsize, but I would suggest that maybe if they employed a few dog sledders during the winter, they could get back to step back a little bit and create some employment opportunities, maybe. But Alaska is one of the only states where people actually get kind of a stipend for being there. Can they afford to kind of help out a little bit?
We just were notified last week, in fact, of the permanent fund dividend that you're mentioning, which is, of course, a system that was put in place to give every man, woman, and child in Alaska who is a legal resident here, meeting certain requirements that are fairly minimal, a check each year. It's
Native
part
and
of,
non-native, urban
oh
and rural,
yes,
everybody.
every single person. And everyone gets the same amount. Doesn't matter your age or how many years you've lived in Alaska. Once you've met the basic eligibility requirements as a resident here, you take part in this permanent fund dividend. This year it's $1,174, and that will be distributed to Alaskans starting in October.
And
And
how can they get their checks if the U.S. Mail Service doesn't deliver them up into the?
that's a good question, Paul.
You gotta compromise somewhere. We got 1 minute left, Lori. It's good. I understand. I'm joking around a little bit, but
Yeah.
let's ask this serious question. Whatever happened to Sarah Palin? Did she fall off the map somewhere? I haven't heard about anything about her in 2 or 3 weeks.
The latest that I've heard is that she's going to decide sometime in November now if, in fact, she's going to run for president or not. So
Okay.
that's the latest that I've heard
We'll wait
about
for the
what
fireworks.
she
It's
may do.
she may just get mad enough about the mail service that she will announce, I guess.
It could happen.
Good talking to you. That's like 13 minutes. We got to go for this time around. We'll catch up with you again in the near future. Thanks for joining with us for the Native News Update, Lori. And where can we
Thanks,
get
Paul.
these stories? Where are we looking at them for online?
You you can go to alaskapublic.org. That's our new consortium website. If you have aprn.org in your browser, that's fine. It'll still take
Still
you to the
get that.
same place. But our new site is alaskapublic.org.
Okay. Thank you much for joining with us, Lori.
Thanks.
And that is another roundup of news from Indian country on this edition of the Native News Update. Join with us tomorrow when we believe we'll have an interview with Anishinaabe Winona Leduc. Come back again soon.